There's something different about people who can spot lies instantly. Maybe it's the way they go still when someone's talking. That peculiar focus that looks like casual attention, but is actually processing 1,000 microsignals you don't even see. Maybe it's how they trust their gut when something feels wrong, even when the words sound perfectly reasonable. Or maybe it's that they learned early, too early, that survival meant knowing when the person in front of you was telling the truth. Because people who can detect deception didn't learn this skill from a book or a training seminar. They learned it the way you learn a language when it's the only one spoken in your house. Through necessity, through repetition, through stakes high enough that getting it wrong had real consequences. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see why some people can read a lie in 3 seconds flat, while others can be deceived for years. Let's start with something that happened long before these people knew they were learning anything at all. Picture yourself at 7 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. You hear the front door open, and your whole body goes on alert before you consciously think anything. You're listening to the footsteps, not just that someone's home, but how they're walking. Heavy, light, fast, slow. Your mom walks into the kitchen and you look up, but you're not really looking at her face. You're scanning, checking the set of her shoulders, the speed of her movements, the tone of her "how was school" before you answer. You learn by age 6 that the same words can mean completely different things depending on 100 tiny signals you couldn't name but could absolutely feel. Fine could mean actually fine, or it could mean the fight's coming and you need to make yourself small. So you develop this constant surveillance. Not paranoid, just alert. Reading the room before the room even knew what it was going to be. What psychologists call hypervigilance started as a survival adaptation. Dr. Carla McLaren's research on emotional development shows that children in unpredictable environments develop extraordinary perceptual abilities. They learn to read micro-expressions, vocal tone shifts, and physiological markers of emotional state at levels that exceed trained professionals. This isn't trauma exactly. It's your nervous system learning to predict danger by cataloging every possible warning sign. You were building a database of human behavior before you could tie your shoes. Every interaction was data. Every adult mood swing was a pattern to decode. These adults walk into a room, and within 30 seconds, they know who's really in charge, who's pretending, who's hiding something. Not because they're cynical or suspicious, because they're reading signals most people don't even register exist. When someone says, "I'm fine," but their jaw is tight and their breathing is shallow, they notice. When words and body language don't match, they feel the discord instantly. They've spent their entire lives triangulating truth from unreliable narrators. And now, in professional settings, in relationships, in everyday interactions, they spot inconsistencies that others miss completely. But it wasn't just unpredictability that taught them to read between the lines. Sometimes the lies were perfectly consistent. Now, let's talk about what happens when words and reality never quite match up. Your dad says, "I'm not angry," but his knuckles are white on the steering wheel, and he's driving 15 miles over the speed limit. Your mom says, "We're fine, sweetie," but you heard her crying in the bathroom 20 minutes ago, and her eyes are still red. Your teacher says she's disappointed, not mad, but her voice has that edge that means someone's getting detention. You learned early that people's words are often the least honest thing about them. That "I'm not drinking too much" comes from someone who can barely stand straight. That "I'll be there" from a parent means maybe, probably not. So you stopped listening to what people said and started watching what they did. Words became noise. Actions became language. And the gap between the two became the most reliable information you had. Researcher Paul Ekman spent decades studying deception and discovered that incongruence between verbal and nonverbal communication is one of the most reliable indicators of dishonesty. But most people are trained to be polite, to accept words at face value. These individuals learned the opposite. They learned that socially acceptable lies are still lies. That I'm fine is often code for something else entirely. What developmental psychologists call epistemic trust, the assumption that caregivers are reliable sources of truth, never fully formed. Instead, they developed what researchers now recognize as cross-validation behavior, constantly checking words against evidence, tone against content, promises against track records. As adults, they're the ones who notice when a colleague says they're totally fine with the decision, but leaves the meeting tense and silent. They're the friends who ask what's really going on when everyone else accepts the surface answer. They don't believe reassurances that don't match reality. They trust the gap, the contradiction, the thing that doesn't quite fit. It makes them harder to deceive, but also harder to comfort. Because when you've learned that words often obscure truth rather than reveal it, you can't unlearn that. You can only get better at reading what's underneath. And when those contradictions got pointed out, that's when things got even more complex. Here's where it gets psychologically intricate. You saw it happen. You know you did. Your mom was crying. Your dad was yelling. The door slammed hard enough to shake the pictures on the wall. But the next morning at breakfast, when you ask if everything's okay, they look at you like you've lost your mind. We weren't fighting. You must have been dreaming. Why would you say that? And you stand there, 7 years old, knowing what you heard, knowing what you saw, but being told by the two people you're supposed to trust that your reality isn't real. So you learn to trust yourself even when authority figures told you not to. You learn to hold on to your version of events, even when it was denied. You developed an almost stubborn attachment to your own perceptions, because letting them be erased meant losing the ability to trust anything at all. Every time someone said that didn't happen when you knew it did, your internal lie detector got calibrated a little bit sharper. What psychologist Dr. Robin Stern identifies as gaslighting, the systematic denial of someone's perception of reality, has an unexpected side effect. While it can create self-doubt, it can also create people with unshakable confidence in their own observations. Neuroscience research from Dr. Antonio Damasio shows that when people are forced to choose between their direct experience and someone else's narrative, those who maintain trust in their own perception develop enhanced interoceptive awareness, the ability to read their own internal signals. They learn young that their gut feeling is often more reliable than someone else's words. That internal "this doesn't add up" sensation becomes their North Star. These adults trust themselves in ways others don't. When someone tells them you're overreacting or you're remembering it wrong, they don't automatically defer. They've been told their perceptions were false too many times to surrender them easily now. They're the ones who notice when a story changes slightly between tellings, who remember exactly what was said and can spot when the narrative shifts, who trust that uncomfortable feeling when something's off, even when everyone else seems convinced. They learn that their reality is valid even when denied, and that makes them nearly impossible to gaslight as adults. But reading lies wasn't just about noticing contradictions. It was about understanding what silence meant too. Consider what happens when your emotional safety depends on reading the room perfectly. You walk in the door after school, and within 3 seconds, you know whether it's a good day or a bad day. Not because anyone's told you, because you can read it in the air, the way the kitchen sounds. Is someone cooking calmly or slamming cupboards? The television volume, background noise or escape mechanism? Your sibling's location. In their room with the door closed means danger. Out in the living room means it's safe to be visible. You learned to be a mood detective because getting it wrong meant walking into a minefield. You developed this rapid assessment system. Scan, categorize, adjust behavior accordingly. By age 8, you could determine in under 5 seconds whether to be cheerful, distraction needed, invisible, danger present, or helpful, tension that could be diffused. You became fluent in unspoken emotional languages because spoken words rarely told you what you needed to know. Developmental psychologist Beatrice Beebe's research on mother-infant attunement shows that humans are born with the capacity to read emotional states, but some environments dramatically amplify this ability. Children who grow up in emotionally volatile households develop what's called affective forecasting, the ability to predict emotional weather patterns before they fully form. This isn't just sensitivity. It's pattern recognition running at high speed. They're processing vocal tone, facial microexpressions, breathing patterns, physical proximity, and dozens of other variables simultaneously. What looks like intuition is actually sophisticated real-time analysis their brain learned to run automatically for survival. As adults, they walk into job interviews and know within minutes if it's going well. They sense relationship problems before their partner has even articulated them. They can feel when someone's about to quit, about to confess, about to explode, often days before it happens. They're reading the same patterns they learned to read as children, the small signs that precede the big events. And when they say something feels off, they're usually right, because they've been tracking atmospheric emotional pressure their entire lives. Their gut isn't guessing. It's calculating based on data points you're not even seeing. And all that observation meant they spent thousands of hours doing something most people never do consciously at all. Let's talk about what happens when you spend your childhood watching instead of trusting. You're quiet at family gatherings, not shy exactly, watchful. While other kids are playing, you're sitting on the edge of the room cataloging. You notice that Aunt Marie touches her throat when she's uncomfortable, that your dad's voice goes flat right before he gets angry, that your mom laughs differently when she means it versus when she's just being polite. You're collecting data constantly. The way people's eyes move when they're remembering something versus inventing something. How hands behave when someone's nervous. The specific way bodies angle away when interest is fading. You're not trying to do this. It's just what your brain does now. Thousands of hours of observation, building a reference library that others never even think to create. You're learning to read humans the way other kids are learning to read books. UCLA psychologist Albert Mehrabian's research famously found that 93% of communication is nonverbal, 55% body language, 38% tone of voice, just 7% actual words. But most people are terrible at reading that 93%. These individuals became experts by necessity. Neuroscientist Marco Iacoboni's work on mirror neurons shows that observational learning creates strong neural pathways. The more you watch human behavior, the better your brain becomes at predicting it. They built what researchers call behavioral fluency through sheer volume of observation. By age 12, they'd logged more hours studying human nature than most psychology students complete in 4 years of undergrad. Now they can spot a fake smile because they've seen 10,000 real ones and know the difference. They notice when someone's laugh doesn't reach their eyes, when politeness is covering anger, when enthusiasm is forced. They don't have to think about it. Their brain just flags the incongruence automatically. They're walking, talking lie detectors, not because they're suspicious by nature, but because they have an encyclopedic reference library of human authenticity. And when something doesn't match the pattern, it registers immediately. Not as judgment, just as fact. As information their brain can't help but process. But it wasn't just what they saw. It was what they learned to feel. Here's something most people don't understand about lie detection. It's not about catching one lie. It's about recognizing patterns across hundreds of lies. Your dad says he'll be at your soccer game. He's said it before, 3 times before. You know the pattern now. The promise sounds the same every time. Sincere, certain, detailed. I'll be there. I'm leaving work early. I'll be on the left side near the goal. And 3 times he didn't show. So now, when he makes that same promise, you don't hear the words. You hear the pattern. You've learned that promises from this person follow a specific trajectory. Enthusiasm, excuse, absence. Your mom says we'll talk about it later, which you've learned means no, but I don't want to deal with your disappointment right now. I'm fine means she's crying in 3 hours. Don't worry means start worrying. You're not being cynical. You're being accurate. You've run this experiment enough times to know the results. You've become a pattern recognition machine, specialized in human unreliability. Cognitive psychologist Daniel Kahneman's work on pattern recognition shows that the human brain is exceptional at detecting patterns when motivated. These individuals were highly motivated. Their emotional safety depended on predicting behavior accurately. What researchers call temporal pattern recognition became their specialty. They learned to see not just isolated incidents, but sequences. They noticed that certain words preceded certain behaviors, that specific phrases predicted specific outcomes. Research from MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab shows that the human brain can detect behavioral patterns from as few as 3 data points. These people had hundreds. They'd built predictive models of human behavior before they knew what modeling was. As adults, they spot serial liars on date 2 or 3, not date 20. They recognize manipulation tactics they've seen before, even dressed in different words. When someone says "trust me," they automatically scan their database. Who else has said that? What happened next? They're not paranoid. They're pattern matchers. And because they've logged so many instances of words versus actions discrepancies, they can recognize the architecture of dishonesty regardless of the specific content. The details change, but the structure stays the same, and they learned to read structure, not surface. That makes them very hard to deceive with familiar lies wearing new masks. And somewhere in all that observation, they learn to trust something most people ignore entirely. Now let's talk about that feeling. You know the one. Someone's telling you a story, and something feels wrong. You can't name what it is. The facts make sense. The delivery seems genuine, but there's something underneath. Something your conscious mind hasn't caught yet, but your body already knows. Most people ignore that feeling. They've been trained to be polite, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to trust words over instinct. You learned the opposite. You learned that the uncomfortable flutter in your stomach, that tightness in your chest, that subtle wrongness you can't articulate, that's information. You learned to listen to it because every time you ignored it to be polite, you regretted it later. So you started treating that feeling like an alarm system. Not one that's always right, but one that's worth investigating. And the more you trusted it, the more refined it became. Now, it doesn't just say danger, it tells you specifically what kind. What Gavin de Becker calls the gift of fear in his research on intuition and violence prevention is actually your unconscious brain processing information faster than your conscious mind can articulate. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis explains how your body creates physical sensations, gut feelings, when it recognizes patterns associated with past negative outcomes. Most people dismiss these signals as irrational. These individuals learn to treat them as data. Research from University of Leeds shows that intuitive decision-making can be more accurate than analytical reasoning when people have domain expertise. These people have deep expertise in human dishonesty. Their intuition isn't magic. It's pattern recognition processing at speeds consciousness can't match. They're the ones who say, "I don't trust him," and can't explain why. And 6 months later, everyone else catches up. They turn down job offers that seem perfect because something feels wrong, and later learn the company was imploding. They end relationships before the betrayal happens because they sensed it coming. This isn't mystical. It's their unconscious mind flagging inconsistencies. Their conscious mind hasn't assembled yet. The room feels off because they noticed 17 microsignals that don't add up. They just haven't consciously counted them yet. Learning to trust that pre-conscious analysis, despite social pressure to ignore it, might be their most valuable skill. Which brings us to how all of this shows up in their lives today. Because these aren't just childhood skills that faded. They're capabilities that deepened with every year. Let's talk about what it's actually like to walk through the world this way. You're in a job interview, and the hiring manager says all the right things. Great benefits, supportive culture, work-life balance. But their eyes don't match their words. Their energy feels forced. The smile is performing. And you know, not suspect, know that whatever they're selling isn't real. Your friend introduces you to her new boyfriend. He's charming, says all the right things. Everyone loves him immediately. Except you notice how he positions himself, how he controls the conversation, how his concern for her sounds rehearsed. 3 months later, when it all falls apart, she asks how you knew. You didn't know what would happen specifically. You just recognized the architecture. You saw the performance underneath the presentation. You've been reading that code since before you could read actual books. Research from Michigan State University shows that people with high emotional intelligence and trauma-informed perceptual abilities consistently outperform others in detecting deception. Not because they're cynical, but because they process more channels of information simultaneously. However, Dr. Judith Herman's work on complex trauma also shows this hypervigilance comes with costs. Difficulty relaxing, tendency toward overanalysis, challenges with trust. These aren't superpowers without side effects. The same neural wiring that makes them exceptional at detecting dishonesty can make intimate relationships harder. Because when you can see through everyone, it's difficult to let anyone close. When you're always analyzing, it's hard to just be present. They're incredibly valuable in professional settings. They spot frauds, identify manipulation, see through corporate doublespeak. But in personal relationships, they struggle. Because everyone lies sometimes. Small lies, social lies, protective lies. And they see all of them. They have to consciously choose which ones matter and which ones don't. They have to learn, have to actively study how to trust people despite seeing their flaws, their inconsistencies, their small dishonesties clearly. Most people trust until given reason not to. They have to work backwards, building trust despite reasons not to. That's exhausting. It's valuable. It's protective. It's sometimes isolating. But it's who they are. Let's be clear about something. This ability didn't come without costs. The same experiences that made them exceptional at reading lies also made trust harder, relaxation more difficult, and genuine connection more complex. Not everyone who grew up in unpredictable environments developed these skills. Some developed anxiety instead. Some developed shutdown responses. This isn't about romanticizing difficult childhoods or suggesting trauma creates advantages. It doesn't. It creates survival mechanisms. Sometimes those mechanisms become sophisticated capabilities. Sometimes they become limitations. But the people who developed this particular set of capabilities, the ones who can spot lies instantly, who read body language like a first language, who trust their gut even when they can't explain why, they carry something genuinely remarkable. They learn to see what most people are trained to ignore. They learn to trust their perceptions when authority figures denied them. They learn to value patterns over promises, actions over words, consistency over performance. In a world of increasing deception, deepfakes, sophisticated scams, corporate spin, dating app profiles that bear little resemblance to reality, these people's skills are more valuable than ever. They're the ones who spot the AI-generated text, the fake testimonials, the too perfect story that's just slightly off. Not because they're paranoid, because they've spent their entire lives learning to separate signal from noise, truth from performance, genuine from calculated. That's the psychology of people who can spot lies instantly. They didn't take a course. They didn't read a book. They lived an extended apprenticeship in human nature, starting long before they had words for what they were learning. And while they might wish they'd had easier childhoods, while they might struggle with trust in ways others don't, they walk through the world with a clarity most people never develop. They see through. They see underneath. They see what's actually happening instead of what they're being told is happening. That's not cynicism. That's hard-earned wisdom. And in a world where deception is increasingly sophisticated, that wisdom might be exactly what we all need more of.